Can Indiana take down mighty Ohio State? 13 more FBS games are postponed or canceled this weekend, and I preview each of the Week 9 college pick'em matchups. I'm Jay Smith, and this is After Further Review.
And now, after further review, a Clemson student's perspective on sports.
There's a personal foul on number 99 of the defense. After he tackled the quarterback, he's giving them business down there. That's a 15-yard penalty.
Well, welcome in, everyone. I'm Jay Smith, and this is After Further Review. Thanks so much for tuning in. Only one show this week. It's finals week for me. There's a lot going on, and so I apologize, but wasn't able to get out a show earlier this week. Just didn't have time. There was a lot going on. I'm done now, thankfully. I know a handful of people that still have finals going into next week. The way that Ole Miss has scheduled their finals is it started on Wednesday, and it carries over into Tuesday of next week. Because, again, they're wrapping up their semester before Thanksgiving, and so it's kind of been a mess. Same amount of work in less time with the semester being 2 weeks shorter, so it's been crazy, but I wanted to get a show in this week, and let's start off with the marquee game of this weekend, probably the biggest game in the Big Ten all season long. And you already know what I'm talking about. It's Ohio State and Indiana. Now, the beautiful thing about college football is if you'd have said to me a month ago, hey, the Big Ten 4 weeks in is not going to have, Minnesota isn't going to be anywhere near the top. That would have definitely taken me by surprise. Michigan, not being around, I think. Even if you think, okay, Michigan's finally rounding that corner, they always find a way to disappoint you, and they certainly have this year. So that would have been too shocking. Wisconsin, right? They've only been able to play I think a couple games this season, so they're no longer in the mix. Penn State. This was the big one. This is the big one from the Big Ten this year in terms of surprises. Because I don't think anyone would have seen Penn State starting the season 0-4. 0-4. And I believe that's the first 0-4 start for an AP Top 10 team since, I want to say it's like 1984 Pitt did that. I believe Pitt was the last team. I don't know if I have the year correct. I'm pulling a stat from my brain. And again, my brain's kind of shot with it being finals week. But it's been a minute. It's been a minute since an AP Top 10 team started the season 0-4. So again, within the Big Ten, the storyline, we talked about this several shows ago, where there were really 5 teams. There were 5 teams. There were, 3 from the East in Ohio State, Penn State, and then Michigan, probably in that order. And then you had 2 teams really in the West. It was really Wisconsin and Minnesota that a lot of people thought were going to battle for that top spot in the West. And we knew Ohio State and Penn State were playing, right, that second week of the season. And so, a lot of questions were going to be answered early on. And Penn State is a team that you could spend a lot of time breaking down, trying to figure out, what happened. I feel like the Indiana game, the way in which they lost that game, really did a number on their confidence. And, part of that is it's James Franklin's job to get them out of that rut. They haven't done it. They performed okay against Ohio State, or they kept it close, 38-25, but it never felt like Penn State had a chance at winning that game. Not really. It always felt like Ohio State was about a touchdown or 2 ahead. And then Maryland, that game being at home, you've started the season 0-2, but it's really inexcusable to drop another game and to go 0-3. And they lost that one 35-19. So by a higher deficit than they lost to Ohio State. So that's when you knew, right? That's when you knew. You knew that Penn State was done their season was over. They had checked out mentally. And listen, I never, and maybe this is a minority position, but it doesn't matter who it is, what team it is, if it's a rival, if it's a team I've never, any of my schools have never played. Like, I don't care. I'd rather go out and beat you than you just not show up to play. Like, there's just something about that isn't as satisfying. And I understand, like, if you're a Maryland or an Indiana and you haven't beaten Penn State in decades, sometimes you don't care. You just don't care. You're like, you know what? This team's bad this year. We're gonna pounce on it, and you can't take that victory away from us. I understand that to a certain extent. I do, and I get that. The Clemson has been so dominant now for the last almost decade that it's easy for me to sit there and say, oh, I'd rather the team show up than because again, Clemson, if they show up, they're gonna beat almost anybody they play. But in terms of this Penn State discussion, you kind of felt it. You felt it after the Maryland game. You felt that just the wind, whatever was left in the tank, was gone, and they weren't replenishing any momentum, any energy. And they turn around the next week on the road at Nebraska and lose that one 30-23. Now, Nebraska opened up, I believe, a sizable lead in that game. And then Penn State kind of clawed their way back because at the half, it was 27-6. It was 27-6 at the half in favor of the Cornhuskers. So it certainly felt like Penn State was going to get routed on the road. And then, to their credit, they held Nebraska to 3 points in the second half. Now, part of that was Nebraska, I think, changing the game plan and playing very timid. It's amazing to me. It's amazing to me how many teams, how many coaches with great football minds just completely changed the game plan in the second half when everything in the first half worked. It worked. And you start playing conservative football. Clemson's done this more times than I can count. And it's nauseating. You're up by like 20, and you just go, okay, now we're just going to run. We're going to run, and we're going to, like, check that. Like, why? So, Nebraska really kind of allowed Penn State to get back in this game. But you have to give credit to the Nittany Lions for at least coming out in the second half and trying and giving effort. More effort than we've seen from them in the Ohio State game or the Maryland game. And even the Indiana game, right? The Indiana game, I don't think they were really taking it seriously. I think you can make the argument that where Penn State went wrong this year is they weren't taking Indiana seriously because all eyes were on Ohio State the following weekend. And so what happened? They traveled to Indiana, and all of a sudden it's a close game, and all of a sudden we're in overtime, and then, oh my God, a bang-bang call goes the other team's way, and the game's over. The game's over. And then when you actually get to the big game against Ohio State, you're the thought in the back of your mind is lingering of, oh, we could have done this, we could have done that, we should have taken care of Indiana, and you're not ready to play mentally against one of the best football teams in the country so far, right? The Ohio State's shown remarkable consistency so far. They look like Clemson did at the beginning of this season, just dominance. And they lost that one. And then they come to Maryland. They host Maryland the week after. And see how it dominoes? I mean, again, that's college football, and that's almost any sport. If you get inside your own head, if you're not mentally prepared, if you're not mentally sharp, you're not going to play well. Now, it's college football, and so you still have coaches who are supposed to, ideally kind of get the team back on track, galvanize the guys, and that has not happened for the Nittany Lions this season. And so they sit at 0-4. So again, within the Big Ten this year, I would say the biggest surprise to me is Penn State starting 0-4. Now, that does not overshadow Minnesota's abysmal 1-3 record. The Golden Gophers this season at 1-3, dead last in the Big Ten West, is shocking. It really is shocking. Only when they have this season is against Illinois. They won that one 41-14. They've lost to Michigan, and it wasn't close, right? It wasn't close. We saw that in the season opener. That's what everybody was like, oh, okay, maybe Michigan this year. Maybe, right? Maybe they kind of get out of that middle tier of the Big Ten. Maybe they start to compete and make noise for a spot in the Big Ten championship. Well, as we saw with Michigan, that's not going to be the case. But it really doesn't make Minnesota look good when you lose to Michigan at home, 49-24, then turn right back around the next week, travel to Maryland, lose a close game, heartbreaking game, 45-44. And then you also lose to Iowa this past week, 35-7. They didn't really even compete in the Iowa game. Didn't compete at all. And didn't compete in the Michigan game. So Minnesota has some serious issues as well. I think maybe one of the big surprises out of the Big Ten this year, I mean, would you say maybe Maryland because they're 2-1? I mean, they lost in awful fashion to Northwestern season opener, 43-3. But they have wins against Minnesota and Penn State. Now, the Ohio State game and the Michigan State game have been canceled. You'd like to think Maryland probably would have lost. I mean, they would have lost to Ohio State. Probably would have beaten Michigan State. And now they have at Indiana on next weekend, November 28th, at Michigan and Rutgers. So they have 3 games left. So I don't know why I keep saying Michigan. Maryland, they're going to play 6 games this season in the regular season. I think the Big Ten's still doing their extra game when the conference championship happens, but I don't know at this point. Everything's kind of up in the air. So either way, on the schedule right now, Maryland's got 3 more games. I think they beat Michigan. I think they beat Rutgers. I think they'll probably lose to Indiana. So I think Maryland finishes 4-2. All things considered, your only losses are to Indiana and Northwestern. The only other loss that they potentially would have suffered is probably Ohio State. So even a 3 loss, like that's not bad for the Terrapins. But yeah, the Big Ten this year has really, excluding Ohio State, it's really been turned up on its head. Now, Wisconsin has shown consistency. The trouble for the Badgers is that they're 2-0 and Northwestern's 4-0 right now, which, again, in my understanding of how the Big Ten championship game will work is, if there's if Northwestern has more wins, then it doesn't matter. The only way that I would imagine Wisconsin jumps Northwestern is if they beat them this weekend, right? So that gives them, they'd be 3-0 in conference play. Northwestern would be 4-1. And then Northwestern would have to, Wisconsin would have to match their win total, right? I mean, I'm doing this math correctly in my head, right? I'm assuming I am. And Wisconsin's closing out with a pretty tough schedule, right? Northwestern this weekend on the road, Minnesota at home. You'd like to think they could take care of that one, unless Minnesota kind of breathes life into their season again. Indiana at home, and then Iowa on the road. Those are not easy games. So Wisconsin right now is certainly not in the driver's seat out of the Big Ten West. You got to think it's Northwestern. And again, Northwestern, who's sitting at 19th in the AP poll, they're 4-0. They got Wisconsin, Michigan State, Minnesota, and Illinois. It's a breeze for the Wildcats. It really is. At most, I think they lose to Wisconsin, maybe Minnesota because it's on the road, maybe. The thing about Northwestern is their offense has really not done a lot. I mean, again, you look at their schedule so far, right? They had the Maryland game where they won 43-3, but then these last 3 games, 21-20, beating Iowa on the road. 21-13, taking down Nebraska at home. 27-20 at Purdue, right? So this is a Northwestern team that's averaging like mid to high 20s. And that's not That's not. It's not going to beat Ohio State. Certainly, I would say at this point you'd be a fool to pick anybody from the Big Ten but Ohio State to win the conference. Because again, it's going to come down to Wisconsin or Northwestern. It is, and I don't know if Wisconsin can catch Northwestern because they've had so many games canceled. And I don't see anything about Northwestern at this point that makes me think, okay, there's a legitimate threat to Ohio State winning a Big Ten title. Like, no, where? I don't see it. So, all this contextual information kind of leads us into, okay, biggest game this year in the Big Ten is Indiana, Ohio State. Now, one of the other big games this year in the Big Ten is also this weekend, Northwestern and Wisconsin. That is a big game because that could potentially decide the West. But the one we're going to focus on is Indiana and Ohio State. Now, this is a Cinderella story for the Hoosiers, right? This is the highest I believe they've been ranked since 1967. I mean, it's been decades. It has been decades since we've seen, certainly before my lifetime, since we've seen the Hoosiers in the top 10. Right? I think they're sitting at 9th right now in the AP poll. And you know what's really interesting is that Ohio State at 3 and Indiana at 9. Right? These are two top 10 teams. And there is a rather large spread on this game. Like, you don't typically see such a large spread, but in a top 10 versus top 10 matchup. Right now, Ohio State's favored by 20.5. The 3-touchdown favorite. They are a 3-touchdown favorite against the Hoosiers. So they're going by the betting lines, like, not a lot of confidence in Indiana to get this done. Now, obviously, Justin Fields is probably the guy from the Big Ten who will likely make it to the Heisman finalist, trophy presentation, whatever that's going to be. Now, I think I saw news that it's going to take place virtually or it's, I don't know what the status of that is, but this is a guy, Justin Fields, that's played extremely well. He's thrown for 900 yards this season. He's 72 for 83, which is just mind-blowing. 11 touchdowns, no picks. And Ohio State has, played well in their wins against Nebraska, Penn State, and then Rutgers. Again, Ohio State really hasn't played a lot of tough competition this season. Rutgers, okay. Nebraska, nobody's expecting Nebraska to make any noise. The Penn State game was one that a lot of people had circled as a good way to get as a measuring stick in terms of what was Ohio State made of and how well were they going to be able to take care of the other competitors in their conference. Well, it turns out that Penn State is not in the running this year. So you look at Ohio State and you say, all right, they've played Nebraska, Penn State, and Rutgers. So is that enough? Is that enough to just write them in? Is that enough to favor them by 3 touchdowns? Now, they've looked impressive. They've looked, again, like Clemson did earlier this season, just dominant at times. They've had some quarters where they've played lackluster, but overall, it's been 3 impressive wins. Now, you flip over to the Hoosiers, right? The Hoosiers, they're at 4-0. Obviously, we've talked about the Penn State win. You can slice and dice that however you want. It certainly, I think, made Indiana believe. And after their wins against Rutgers on the road, and then Michigan, right? Beating Michigan at home 38-21, I think really did it for them. I think it really convinced them, all right, guys, this is our year, this is our moment, this is our time. And they came out and thrashed Michigan State on the road 24-0. Shut out the Spartans. That's impressive to do. That's impressive to do no matter what level of college football you're playing at, no matter what conference you're in, shutting out an opponent. An in-conference opponent. So you again, about the same skill level, right? This isn't Clemson shutting out the Citadel. This isn't Alabama shutting out, who does Alabama play? What are all their cupcake games? Like McNeese State or something? This is an in-conference game and Indiana shut out the Spartans 24-0. So the Hoosiers are riding high. They are riding high, and they, I think, behind BYU and Cincinnati, might be one of the hottest teams in the country. I didn't say the most talented. I said the hottest, one of the hottest teams in the country. Okay, BYU, I think, and Cincinnati still are in that 1 and 2 slot. I think the Hoosiers are a close third, though. I think they're a close third, and they're going to play inspired, during this game. Now, what doesn't help the Hoosiers' cause is the fact that this is at Ohio State, right? This is a game at Columbus. Interestingly, it's kicking off at noon. I thought that was strange. I expected this to be an afternoon or an evening game, but it says here it's kicking off at noon on Fox. Again, this is the game to watch this weekend. This is the game to watch. There's not a whole lot of other games to watch. We've had 13 more games postponed or canceled this week, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But again, I think Indiana is going to show up ready to play, and I think they believe this could be their year. Now, taking a step back, right, and looking at the Big Ten as a whole, obviously right now the West is kind of a mess, or at least it's certainly not what we all expected it to be. You got two teams at the top in the East. You got Indiana and you got Ohio State. Now, Indiana's got 4 wins in conference, right? They're 4-0. Ohio State has 3. They're 3-0. If Indiana were to beat Ohio State, they were to win and go to 5-0 in conference play, and Ohio State dropped to 3-1, you almost would have to think that Ohio State would have to win out, right? Illinois on the road, Michigan State on the road, Michigan at home. They do that easily. Okay, Ohio State. This is the last test for the Buckeyes. And that's crazy to say because this is the 4th game they've played. But this is it. This is really, I think, the only game this season where we'll get a good matchup against Ohio State from a team that believes they can beat Ohio State. See, that's the key. That's the key to this game. Indiana believes they can beat Ohio State. Nobody else Ohio State has played this season believed they could beat them. And so I think, again, when you look at Ohio State's schedule, if they were to lose this game and they have those 3 remaining games, I think they win those easily and they finish 6-1. They finish 6-1. Now, again, Indiana would be 5-0. They'd be 5-0, and they would have games remaining against Maryland, at Wisconsin, and Purdue. Right? We just talked about Ohio State. They would finish their season. I think did we say? I didn't say 5-1. Did we say if Ohio State? No. It'd be 6-1. It'd be 6-1. Because they would, so they're 3-0 right now. If they were to lose to Indiana, they'd be 3-1. Finish the season undefeated, they would go 6-1. So Ohio State, the best they'd be able to get would be 6-1, assuming they lose to Indiana. I'm trying to keep all this straight in my head here. And so a 6-1 Ohio State team would need Indiana to lose, 2 of their last 3 games? Because Indiana would be 5-0. They'd be 5-0, or would they need them to lose all 3? Because if Indiana won their 6th game in conference, how would this work? If Indiana finished the season, because they play more games than Ohio State, because Ohio State's had a game canceled. So if Indiana plays 8 games this season, Ohio State will have only played 7, because they'll finish 6-1. Then what if Indiana finished 6-2? If Indiana finishes 6-2 and Ohio State finishes 6-1, I think Indiana still gets in because they have the same number of wins, but hold the tiebreaker. Maybe, or maybe it is Ohio State because there's a higher winning percentage there. That would be interesting. However, that's assuming that Indiana goes 1-2 1-2 in their last 3 games. Maryland, Wisconsin, Purdue. I mean, they could lose to Maryland. We talked about Maryland a little bit ago. Maryland's kind of that sneaky team right now at 2-1. Wisconsin's certainly a tricky one. On the road at Wisconsin's always a tough game. They could drop that one. I think they beat Purdue. So really to come down to Maryland. I think the Maryland game is kind of that closer to a toss-up. I'd be less comfortable picking Maryland to beat Indiana than I would be to pick Wisconsin to beat Indiana, right? I think Wisconsin's a better shot because they're a more talented team, and it's at Wisconsin. Either way, we've kind of beat around the bush. We've talked about all these different scenarios. Let's talk about the actual game. Let's talk about Indiana at Ohio State kicking off tomorrow at noon. Now, the Hoosiers are led by Michael Penix Jr., who, again, has played really, really well this year, stepped up, and again, his performance, while it may not have the nicest looking stats in the world, he's done it where it counts, and he's gotten his team across the finish line. Thrown for over 1,000 yards, he's got 9 touchdowns, and Indiana right now is averaging about 34 points a game. So again, a pretty decent offensive performance out of these guys. Ohio State right now, they're at 46 points a game and 511 total yards of offense. Indiana's only averaging 362. And if you look at the defensive side of things, that's where things actually kind of get interesting. That's where Ohio State has, if any weakness, the weakness, and that's on defense. The Buckeyes are on defense allow more yards on average than Indiana. 320 for Indiana, 356 for Ohio State. Where does that mostly come from? Well, for Ohio State, it's 224 yards allowed in the air, 131 yards allowed on the ground. For Indiana, they're 320 yards allowed, 209 of that's in the air, 111 of it's on the ground. And Indiana's not a run-heavy team, right? They're a pass-heavy team. They average 267 yards passing and less than 100 yards rushing. Ohio State's a little bit more balanced with 300 yards passing on average and 208 on average on the ground. But as I touched on a second ago, I think the real key to this game could be Ohio State's defense. And it's been a little porous at times. And if Indiana is able to, grab chunk plays, if they're able to stay on the field, keep that offense on the field, which again puts Ohio State's defense on the field, makes them tired, you could see a game that stays close. Key to the game for Indiana is control the clock. And how do you control the clock? By getting first downs, sustaining drives, and moving the football. So that's the key right there. If Indiana stays on the field, if they drive the length of the field, and if they take more, if they take double-digit play, if it takes more than 10 plays for each Indiana drive, it's going to look really good for the Hoosiers. Now, if it's a bunch of 3-and-outs, I think the momentum will swing back towards the Buckeyes. I think that would match up much better for Ohio State. But if Indiana is able to confuse Ohio State, if Penix has time to throw or scramble or, do whatever he needs to do, and they're able to move the ball down the field, chew that clock, keep Ohio State's defense on the field, tire them out, you could see a really close game going into the third and fourth quarters. I think you really could. Now, I still think Ohio State's got the more talented team, and they should win this game. Right on paper, Ohio State should win this game. I don't think as easily as the betting line is suggesting. 3-touchdown favorite, I think, is way too generous. Because, again, we've talked about Ohio State's schedule. Hadn't played anybody, really. Hadn't played anybody to warrant again, when Clemson played Miami earlier this season, they were the favorite, but not by 3 touchdowns. Clemson had to prove, right? They had played a few teams up to that point, but they had to prove it against a higher caliber opponent. This right here is just, it's Ohio State. Let's give them a 3-touch. See, it doesn't make sense to me. You're discounting Indiana. You're discounting the Hoosiers, who are going to play inspired in this game. I expect this game to be close. I think Ohio State ultimately prevails. I think they win this one, but I think this will be the best test for the Buckeyes in the regular season. I really do. I really do. And I think, again, with even the big Ten West the way it is right now, I'm not even sure if whoever they're going to play in the Big Ten West will be as competitive against them as Indiana may be tomorrow. We'll have to see, though. I don't know. It should be an exciting game. I'm definitely going to tune in. Again, noon on Fox. That's definitely the marquee game from this weekend. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll be talking about some more college football games that have been postponed or canceled this weekend. Welcome back to the show, and thanks so much for tuning in, listening to After Further Review. I'm Jay Smith. Hey, whether it's through the AFR podcast, available on Spotify, iTunes, anywhere you listen to podcasts, or if you're watching on Facebook, I appreciate you taking the time to watch or listen to the show. All right, so second segment of this week's show, we're talking about postponement and cancellation of several, more than a dozen actually, college football games. And let's just go through a couple of these. Some are more interesting than others. We have, I think, almost every... How many different conferences do we have represented? We have the SEC, the ACC, the Big 12, the Big 10. It looks like... Okay, and the Pac-12. I was going to say, I believe every Power 5 conference is represented in these cancellations. So it doesn't seem to be confined to a specific... Like, again, last week, it really hit the SEC hard. Hit them hard. And this week, there's only one postponed game in the SEC. So, here's each of the games. First, I'm going to list off the ones that have been postponed that are supposedly going to be replayed at a later date. We start off with Ole Miss at Texas A&M. The Aggies right now are number 5 in the country, and I believe there is no road for them to make the college football playoff. I don't see a team that, again, is in the SEC West with Alabama that lost to Alabama in week 2. I don't see a path for them because they're not going to play in a conference championship. I think you would put a 1 or 2 loss team that did play in their conference championship in the college football playoff before you put in a Texas A&M team that didn't even make it to their conference championship. Either way, I digress. The point is that A&M needs to play games. If they want to make this argument that, like, hey, we're number 5, hey, we deserve a spot, hey, even though we're not going to play in a conference championship and have another game potentially to our resume, we still think we need to be in the top 4. Well, if you're not playing games, you're not really convincing anybody. Now, again, this is out of their control. However, that is, I think, probably the most significant postponement of this weekend because, again, A&M, if they want to try and make a case, they got to play football games. So Ole Miss A&M, first one we're starting off with is postponed. Switch over from the SEC to the ACC. We got Georgia Tech at Miami. That has been postponed. I know that Manny Diaz, the coach for Miami, has tested positive for COVID-19. I don't have the numbers for the players or staff in front of me, but assuming that the head coach tested positive, I'm going to sit here and assume that there's probably a handful of players that also have COVID. So that game's been postponed. Charlotte at Marshall has been postponed. Now, the Thundering Herd are sitting at 15th right now in the AP poll. They're still undefeated. This probably won't impact them very much. I think Marshall's having a great season. I'm excited for them. I hope they go undefeated. That would be an awesome thing for them. And it's unfortunate, right, that this game's been postponed, but I don't think this will have a huge impact on their season. Let's see. We got Texas at Kansas. That has been postponed. Now, there's been a lot of talk I've seen recently on, Oklahoma and Texas, they're back in the AP poll. They've kind of rebounded. They've gotten things back together. They might can make a playoff run. No, they can't. Big 12 is not making the playoff. They're not making the playoff. And it's great. They rebounded. Okay, sure. No, they're not making a playoff. No. They're just not. So this game really does not have any impact outside of the Big 12 because the Big 12 is not making the playoff. So unfortunate for Texas and Kansas, they can't play this weekend, but has no real significance here. Wake Forest at Duke. We go back to the ACC. That has been postponed. Houston at SMU has been postponed. Now, SMU, I believe, is... They were one loss. I think maybe they dropped. Yeah, they did drop their most recent game. That was to Tulsa. Yes, because Tulsa, I saw, has now won 4 games when trailing by, it's like 10 or more points, like 14 points. Some crazy stat. This just like defies logic. But yeah, SMU did drop their second game of the season to Tulsa. That kind of ended their AP poll run. Still a good team. The Mustangs are still a good team, and you would have to think that they're going to take care of ECU and then possibly Houston again on December 5th if that game does, in fact, get played when it's supposed to be rescheduled. Let's see. What other games have been postponed? Okay, one more postponement. Navy at South Florida. That has been postponed. And now let's get into some of the games that have been canceled. So we have 13 games this season, this week, 13 games this week that have been either postponed or canceled. And 4, 5, 6, 7 have been postponed. So that means we've got 6 cancellations. And those 6 cancellations are starting off Central Arkansas at number 4, Louisiana Lafayette. That game has been canceled. Again, Louisiana Lafayette sitting there at 24th in the AP poll. Maybe they drop out next week. I don't think this has really any impact on the college football playoff. UL Monroe against who are they taking on? Louisiana Tech. That has been canceled. UNLV at Colorado State. That has been canceled. San Jose State at Fresno State. That has also been canceled. And finally, coming out of the Pac-12, this is the lone Pac-12 game this week that's either been postponed or canceled, and it is Arizona State at Colorado. That game has been canceled. So those are the games that have been postponed or canceled this week. As I talked about at the beginning of this segment, I think the most significant one is Ole Miss at Texas A&M, because if you're Texas A&M, you need to keep padding your resume. Sitting there at 5, trying to pretend like you're going to get into the playoff where you're not going to play in your conference championship. If you don't play games, you're not gonna boost the resume. Again, out of their control, but that's definitely a significant postponement. So we'll see if they get that in later this season. All right, we come back. We'll wrap up the show. We're gonna do some college pick'em for Week 9. Leaderboard's still tight. Be sure to get your picks in. We'll break down each of those matchups next. Welcome back to the show. One more segment on this week's After Further Review. I promise we will have a show. We'll probably do at least a show next week. I know next week being Thanksgiving. Typically, I release shows on Tuesday and sometimes Friday. So not sure if we'll do 2 shows next week. Obviously, 1 show this week because of finals week at Ole Miss. But either way, we will definitely have an AFR coming your way next week. But now let's get into college pick'em for Week 9 of the Pick'em League. We got 10 matchups this week to pick from. 10 pretty good games, I believe. How many involve ranked teams? It looks like all but 2. So 8 games involving a ranked team. Let's go ahead and dive into it. First game up, App State taking on Coastal Carolina. Now, Coastal Carolina is sitting at 7-0. We've kind of talked about them on this show. Right, 15th in the AP poll. Chanticleers are having a great year, but don't sleep on the App State. I think Mountaineers is their mascot. They're 6-1. App State's 6-1. Coastal, obviously, we just touched on their 7-0, right? But the Mountaineers, their lone loss comes. Let's see if we pull up their schedule. App State they dropped their game at Marshall on September 19th, way back in Week 2. They lost that one 17-7, but they have wins against Charlotte, Campbell, Arkansas State, UL Monroe, Texas State, and Georgia State. And only got, looks like 4 more games on the slate: Coastal Carolina, Troy, Louisiana, and Georgia Southern. So 6-1, they're potentially going to play 11 games in the regular season. And this is a close one, right? The Coastal's only favored by 6 points. On paper, these teams are very similar. They're both averaging around mid-30s in points per game. Their defense is allowing about 16, right at 16 points per game. Offense is almost identical on paper. They both average about 440 yards of total offense. Now, they differ slightly in how they accomplish that. App State relies more on the running game. They're averaging 261 yards on the ground, only 188 through the air. The Chanticleers, though, they're basically balanced, right? 50-50. 240 yards passing a game, 203 on the ground. So where this game probably will come down to is, can Coastal Carolina's defense, which averages allowing 134 yards rushing, can they, prevent App State from running all over them? And if they're able to do that, I think Coastal will prevail. Now, this is going to be a close game. I think this will be an extremely tight game. This is a noon kickoff on ESPN2, and it's probably the only noon kickoff on ESPN2 all season that I'm going to recommend you watch. So I'm definitely going to have Indiana, Ohio State pulled up on the TV, right? That's going to be the main game that I'm watching. And then I'm sure on the laptop or the iPad or whatever other device I got in front of me, I'm going to have this one pulled up because this is going to be a great game. This is going to be, I think, one of the better games this season outside of the Power 5. And if you have two screens, you should definitely pull this one up. I think this is going to be an awesome game. At the end of the day, though, I think the Chanticleers are going to get this one done. I'm going Coastal Carolina, keeping that streak alive, baby, and see if they can get to 8-0 on the season. All right, next up we got Georgia Southern taking on Army. These are two teams that are 6-2. So when you look at obviously how they stack up against each other, one of the big things that sticks out to me is Army's defense. They have played really, really well this year. They held the Citadel to 9 points. They held Mercer to 3 points. They held UT San Antonio to 16 points. They held Tulsa to 12 points. Like, Army's defense is legit, and they can run the ball. They can't really throw the ball, but they can run the ball. They're averaging 303 yards on the ground a game. That's insane. Great stuff from the Black Knights. For Georgia Southern, they're kind of a lesser version of Army, only rushing for 275 yards a game and throwing it for about 100. So if this comes down to who can run the ball better, I'm favoring Army. I think the Black Knights will win this matchup. Okay, now for Indiana and Ohio State, we've talked about this a lot. I think this is going to be a really close game. Ultimately, though, I do think Ohio State will win this one, and it should be an exciting game to watch. I think it will be close, but I think Ohio State will prevail and win ultimately. All right, next up we got Cincinnati at UCF. Now, the Bearcats are 7th right now in the AP poll. They are 7-0. UCF might try and play spoiler. They're 5-2 with some impressive wins this season, but I think Cincinnati is on a roll. They see the college football playoff doors beginning to open. I think things will start to kind of fall in place for them, and I'm still very confident that a non-Power 5 team can make the playoff this year. I believe it can happen. So I think Cincinnati wins this one convincingly, and I think they move to 8-0. All right, switch to the Big Ten now. We got Wisconsin and Northwestern. This was the game we mentioned at the onset of the show. This is kind of the bigger game of the Big Ten, the West. Yeah, the West this season. Even if Wisconsin were to win this game, it's going to be tough for them, I think, to catch Northwestern. We did a little bit of the math earlier. I believe I had my numbers right. And Northwestern's looked impressive in their games this year. I was a little bit low on Wisconsin because they just had so many games that were canceled, but they played very impressively in their most recent game. And so for those reasons, I think, the Badgers can get this done. This is a 3:30 kickoff on ABC, so it's an afternoon game. But I really think Wisconsin will prevail, and I think they beat Northwestern. All right, San Diego State taking on Nevada. Nevada's 4-0, San Diego State's 3-1, and when you kind of look at this this matchup, some of the things that stick out to me are really San Diego State's defense. Their defense has played really well this season, and Nevada has just gone up against teams that they could basically exercise their will on. They haven't really had a lot of stout competition, at least on the defensive side of things. And I think if San Diego State is able to play well like they did against Utah State and against UNLV and against Hawaii, I think they stand a good shot at beating Nevada. It could be close. I think it will come down to the wire. It's tough to pick defensive teams this season because it feels like offense has just prevailed in all of them. But I think I'm gonna go San Diego State in this matchup. I think the Aztecs get it done. All right, Kansas State and Iowa State. We're going to the Big 12 now. The Cyclones are 5-2 on the year. Kansas State's 4-3. A lot of inconsistency from Kansas State. I think Iowa State should take care of this one rather easily. I don't expect this to be a particularly close game. 3 matchups left. We got Oklahoma State taking on Oklahoma. This is a big rivalry game in the Big 12. Again, you got these teams in the top 20. So I already hear it. I can already hear the chirps and the chatter. Oh, if Oklahoma wins, they're going to have a tiebreaker over Oklahoma State, and they should be in the top 15, and they're going to... It's not going to matter. It doesn't matter. Oklahoma would be, 6-2. Oklahoma State would also... They'd be 5-2. You'd have to imagine that Oklahoma would probably jump to, I think, maybe 13 or 14. But the losses to Kansas State and Iowa State earlier this year are going to keep them out of the playoff. And even that win against Texas is just not that impressive. Look, the Sooners may climb in the poll. They might even finish in the top 10 if they win out. But it's not going to matter. They're not making the college football playoff. In this matchup, though, I would favor the Sooners. I think they've rebounded well. I think they've kind of found their identity. Oklahoma State has been very inconsistent this season, and I feel like Mike Gundy right now is just trying to kind of handle the reins on the program. So I'm not too confident in the Cowboys, and for those reasons, I'm going to go with Oklahoma. Okay, now we got Liberty and NC State. This is a Liberty team that's taking on another ACC opponent. The Flames are 8-0, led by Hugh Freeze. And this is their third ACC opponent this season. They're 2-0 in the other ones. They beat Syracuse on the road 38-21, and they beat Virginia Tech on the road 38-35. Now, is NC State better than Syracuse or Virginia Tech? It's really, Wolfpack are 5-3. They lost to Virginia Tech earlier this season, 45-24. Now they play Syracuse next week, but I'm not saying the transitive property is any indication of, like that. I don't think that really applies. But NC State's losses this season have been to Virginia Tech, UNC, and Miami. The only win they have against a ranked team was Pitt back in week 3. That was on the road. They won that 30-29. And the biggest thing from NC State this season is they really haven't been very good on offense. They're only averaging like mid-20s, mid to high 20s points a game. And Liberty has really found their identity on offense. They're averaging 40 points a game. Some people are going to say, well, yeah, but that's because they're not playing, really good teams. Well, they've already played 2 ACC teams this year, and they beat both of them. So you just invalidated your argument there. I think the Flames get it done. I think this is a close game. I think it's a close game as the other ACC games for Liberty have been. But I think ultimately the Flames will win this one. I think they move to 9-0. And I think Hugh Freeze right now is definitely going to be on a lot of, job boards around the country as the season wraps up, because I think it's only a matter of time before he lands back at a big program. All right, last matchup on the slate, we got USC taking on Utah. This is Utah's first game of the season. The Utes had, I think they had a couple of games that had to be postponed or canceled. Yeah, they had Arizona and at UCLA that both have been canceled. So this is their first game of the year. Now, based off what I've seen from USC the last couple of weeks, am I really impressed with the Trojans? No, I'm not at all. I don't think their wins against Arizona State or Arizona were particularly impressive. Kind of had to just get it done at the very end. But that being said, there's nothing to go off of for Utah, right? They haven't played a game yet. So for those reasons, I got to pick USC. But who knows? Maybe Utah comes out and it's a close game. Either way, that's been it for the Pick'em League for this week. And again, just a reminder to get your picks in. You definitely want to get those in. We look at the leaderboard right now. Pull up the leaderboard. Let's see. We've got. Well, if the leaderboard will load, we can see who's in the lead. Okay, here we go. So we got Aaron Long and myself. We're tied at 49 right now. We got Razorback 11s at 44, Jackson Wrights at 44, and Hannah Reagan at 41. That rounds out the top 5. It really was interesting. Some people last week had a great week. I mean, I had 7 correct picks, and then some people like Jackson in the top 5, he only had 4 correct picks last week. So it just really distanced everybody out this past week. And so, again, we'll see if the gap closes after this weekend. But right now, we got really, again, those 5 that are still in contention for the top spot at the end of the year. Everybody else is kind of down in that 30s range, and so it would be really difficult to climb out of a 10-point hole with only a handful of weeks left. But it's been a lot of fun. The Pick'em League is always entertaining, and so definitely get your picks in if you haven't already. That's all the time we got, though, for this week's show. Enjoy the games this weekend. We will see you back here at some point next week. I think we'll probably do a show earlier in the week and then take a few days off for Thanksgiving. So appreciate you tuning in. Enjoy your games this coming weekend. I'm Jay Smith. This has been After Further Review.